Mosport, Ontario, mecca of Canadian motor racing, where at least twice a year, 40 to 50,000 spectators watch road racing. The crowds come to see top international drivers compete in production sports cars and sports racing machinery. This is a world apart, with its own sights, sounds, smells, skills, and tensions. It also has its own language. Mosport regularly attracts such accomplished drivers as world champion Jim Clark of Scotland, the U.S. road racing champion Jim Hall of Texas, and New Zealander Bruce McLaren. And because motor racing is a curious blend of professional and amateur drivers, Mosport also attracts Winnipeg lawyer and racing driver George Chapman.
It's a real pleasure to have the association with many of the world-renowned drivers. However, I'm probably much more at home in my office than I am at the racetrack. Strange as it may seem, there's much greater similarity between the practice of law and racing than most people would realize. The preparation that goes into legal work is very extensive, and I've never yet seen any racing team that has been over-prepared. Decisions must be made during the progress of a case, and just like in a race, you have to make many decisions as the race progresses. I started racing many years ago. It really all started back in 1951, I think, when I saw the first real sports car race at Watkins Glen, New York. I've had quite a succession of cars. I think probably the one that was the most enjoyable to drive of all of my previous cars was my Lotus 7. It was a car that sure showed me what a fine handling racing car can be like. But the big moment of my racing career was that cold, dark night at the end of March when my new Lotus 23B arrived from London aboard the Air Canada air freighter. It was a cold night, but I'll tell you that it was the biggest thrill that I've ever experienced to see that car sitting up in the cargo hold, and from the moment I've had it, it's been a real pleasure. Even with a new racing car, there's a great deal of preparation that's required before the start of a race. Frank Mancini and Bill Wicks have done a tremendous job on my car for me. In fact, Frank has been doing mechanical work on my cars from the time I first started racing, and as a direct result of his effort, my cars just haven't been breaking down like a lot of the other racing cars that I've been racing against. I guess you could say that I race them and Frank fixes them.
The first championship race of the season is usually run at Westwood near Vancouver. It's a long drive from Winnipeg. George tows his Lotus in a special lightweight trailer. Fiberglass body must be handled by the gentlest hands. Eager helpers are seldom welcome. Rainwear is in order on this cool, wet day, and George has brought his. Most everyone has. The aficionados of this sport must be wise.
Wherever possible, we've tried to make the racing for Helen and myself to be kind of a family outing. It isn't always possible, but there are lots of events that we can go to that it is that way, and it makes it a lot more fun for both of us, I think. And I think the kids enjoy getting out, too. We don't always race under ideal conditions. You might say the weather isn't very cooperative all the time. However, it's just another problem for us to cope with, and it makes a person change his technique and change his strategy in any particular race. I might say that at times like this, Frank is always very helpful to have around.
And Gary Strauss, second place is being given the
Problems of negotiating a car at speed on a slippery track are many. Concentration is required every split second. Sports car racing demands great natural driving ability and experience, fast wheels and a cool head, particularly at the beginning of a race when the cars are all in a pack. Westwood is a tight 1.8-mile mountainous circuit. A real driver's course with its tight corners and changing gradients. Even the long back straight presents problems in the rain. It's very frustrating to have fouled plugs on a wet track and see what would ordinarily be a slower car pass you with ease. Motor racing is good spectator fun because there's usually a battle somewhere on the track. The Canadian Driving Championship is divided into two categories for cars with engines over and under 2 liters. Chapman's 27-inch high Lotus 23B has a 1.6-liter overhead cam engine putting out 147 horsepower. George is competing against other Lotuses, Elvas, and Porsches. On a track tight like Westwood, the small cars are very competitive. This year's Canadian racing champion Bob McLean of Vancouver gives a simple and effective demonstration of how to recover from a spin-out. McLean is driving a car similar to Chapman's, and in this race eventually finished second behind a Porsche 904. As the race wears on, George gradually improves his position. Moving up from 12th to 9th to 6th place, he slowly whittles down the opposition. George Chapman is a deliberate driver, rarely taking wild chances, content to run a good, steady race. He drives to finish. But if he doesn't finish a race, it isn't his driving ability that can be faulted. The extreme stresses of racing bring out the smallest flaws in even a new car. Normally, a slight weld imperfection would remain unimportant. But coming out of the hairpin, a rear axle joint gives way. George and his car are out of the race. One second, he is a contender. The next brings frustration.
This is always one of the most disappointing and frustrating things that can happen to you, to be forced out of a race for a mechanical breakdown. Some things you just can't predict, and they do happen. Certainly what happened to me wasn't a result of lack of preparation, and it sure is disappointing to find yourself on the sidelines rather than being a competitor out on the track.
The wide, flat expanses of the plains are very familiar to the Chapman racing team. George has won on the airport tracks in all three prairie provinces, at Fort Macleod, Davidson, and McDonald. Every race is preceded by a mechanical inspection. The regulations are explicit. Safety rules must be fulfilled. Motorsport is highly organized, with scrutineers and stewards as its policemen. Particular emphasis is placed on the inspection of suspension and steering mechanism. The driver must wear proper helmet, goggles, and seat belts. The scrutineers will not give their approval till they are certain the car is mechanically sound and the brakes are set up evenly.
At the start of a race, just like at the beginning of a court case, is when you have to double-check your preparation. Actually, while you're doing a lot of these things, it's automatic to you to do them, but your mind is being directed ahead to what's coming up and trying to anticipate what you're going to have to meet as the race goes on. It's on these prairie circuits where I've learned most of my sports car racing, and over the years there's been tremendous improvements both in the caliber of the driving of the competitors and also in the class of cars that have been taking part in the races. Racing presents a challenge. There's a combination of demands that are made on a driver. It isn't just the best car, or rather the fastest or most powerful car that will win a race. There's quite an element of skill in it. I don't hold myself out to be the best in this department, but I realize the skills that are required, and I've been working at developing them. You have to learn the limitations of your car. You have to try and develop an idea of what distance you can stop the car in. You have to learn how tight you can turn your car at any given speed, and learn to calculate the factors that are involved in getting a car through a bend or a series of bends as quickly as possible. when you're turning a corner in a sports car and you're naturally going as fast as you can, you're just on the brink of spinning out, losing control of your car and sliding off the course and staying on. So you're kind of walking a tightrope. And it's this balance, as you might call it, that a person has to learn. And the better you can do it, the faster you can get around the course. The win in any race is always the big moment, and it's pretty nice to be out there in front. To me, I have a tremendous feeling of exuberance when I win a race. I feel partly this feeling because of the fact that it's a culmination of a team effort, and there's a lot of fellows that have done a lot of work on my cars, and I know they share my enthusiasm with me, and they're justly proud that the cars come through. It's funny, I don't really notice the spectators out there, although they really do get enthusiastic about a winner. Myself, I'm out there to take part in the race, and this is all I really ever notice. I do like to try and share the thrill of the win with Helen. Wherever possible, she gets a ride around the track carrying the checkered flag, but that isn't often enough.
Victory. It tastes good. It brings warm greetings from George's young daughter, photographs by a friend, and relief to a parched throat. It's good to win among friends. It also helps to accumulate championship points. Competing in the Canadian Driving Championship necessarily takes George and Helen, along with Frank Mancini, to Eastern Canada, where the schedule includes a night out with the racing fraternity, a chance to meet old friends and chat with competitors in a relaxed atmosphere.
Anyway, while you're on candid camera.
Oh, yeah. You just watch out, fella. Don't run me off like I run off Bob McLean.
Yeah, we'll sign a little pact and run off everybody else in the competition. The frame's all straight, the body's all straight. Yeah. You know Frank Mancini, John Bull?
Oh, we know
John
Bull.
And Stretcher, how are you?
You refer to my partner, right?
Frank, this is Matt Adams.
Matt Adams. How you
Yeah,
doing? I said Davidson.
That's right.
He has a dirty face in it. That's right, more than a dirty face. Yeah.
Shave today, eh?
Broken goggles, too.
Is Harold coming down to watch this fabulous race? He's not.
I left him in charge of the shop.
It's hard to keep racing drivers from talking shop, especially on the eve of the Players 200, eagerly anticipated by last year's champion Ludwig Heimrich.
Hell yeah.
We run the Innsbruck, had we crossed the last spring and back.
Are you satisfied with the car?
Beautiful automobile. I think it's the best automobile I ever driven.
There's more to racing than just being out on the racetrack. There is quite a social side to it, and Helen has enjoyed this aspect of it perhaps more than standing around in the sun and the smell of the rubber and oil at the track. However, it's not very often that Helen gets a chance to dance with her husband, because more often than not, Frank and I are off somewhere talking cars and racing.
Well, last year George had that ex-Comstock Ford, if you know.
Oh, I know, yeah.
And we made that thing finish a race or two, but he come third in the Canadian Championships last year, you know.
Very good,
which is pretty good for a real old pig of a car.
Yes.
They kind of glad they got rid of it, I think, down here. But
Chapman and Mancini visiting the Comstock Racing Team's garage.
Oh, I think, watch our pay job. This is doing a little baking.
Hi, Chuck.
How are you?
It's very nice of you.
Chuck Rathcup of the Comstock team.
To use this way, because I know most of the boys would be in rough shape for a place to work if they didn't have this place to come to, you know.
Well, we're always glad to have them come. Sometimes we learn a few things, you know, from them. They're coming from all over North America.
That's an Olds engine. Board and stroke, we're getting about 375 horsepower.
But how is it for power down the straightaway? Does it seem to have all you want?
I wish I could tell you. We got about 3/4 of a lap, and we were running off the front tanks, and we should have been running off.
American drivers Augie Pabst and Walt Hanskin.
They don't. the water stays in that one and doesn't flow back into
Oh,
the rest.
there's no transfer system on there.
No, there's a transfer from left to right,
But not
from front
fore
to
and
rear.
aft.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly a very impressive field for the races
Well,
tomorrow and Saturday.
Indeed. I looked down, I saw 14 cars that can do better than 150 miles an hour.
Wow.
So you'll have your hands full, won't you?
I think they will. It'll be pretty busy out in that track.
The Players 200 at Mosport is billed as Canada's premier sports car race. It's quite something to watch. Before the start of the race, track officials make certain that all drivers are familiar with the rules.
It's a beautiful day. We have a beautiful crowd. Here in Canada, if there is a yellow flag shown or a stationary yellow flag or a stationary yellow light, you may pass. Joe Mazzetta? George Chapman? Chuck Duval? Max Narriere?
The pageantry at Mosport not only lends color to the sport, but also allows the drivers a momentary escape from pre-race jitters.
I guess it would be fair to say that I'm tense before the start of a race. I feel this in quite a few different ways. I can't eat properly. A lot of people aren't bothered to quite the same extent about these things, but and I do my best to try not to show it. In fact, Frank Mancini is probably, and perhaps my wife, would be the only ones that know I really am nervous. I know that Frank notices that I do all kinds of things. I check the tire pressures 3 and 4 times. I look at the oil on the motor to make sure there's enough oil in there. I do that 3 or 4 times, and I just try and occupy my time because I can't sit still. Right up until the moment the flag falls, I'm a lot of butterflies and very, very uneasy. But the moment a race starts, I can settle right down and like as if it never happened. I just seem to have to get into it before I can settle down. It's a real thrill to be out driving on a course like Mosport. Aside from the fact that it's a beautiful piece of road and twisting and turning and uphill and downhill and so on, but the actual fact that the drivers that are out taking part in the races they're experienced drivers. Of course, they're very capable and they're courteous out on the track. They handle their machinery very well. And I must say it's a real pleasure to be passed on the track by a driver of the caliber of Jim Clark and Jim Hall. These are real fine gentlemen and a credit to the sport. I really discount the element of danger that's talked about in racing. There's a lot of factors that people who talk about this don't really take into account, such as the experienced drivers, and they really are people that know how to handle the car. The cars themselves are always very well prepared and carefully inspected before the start of the race for mechanical defects. You must remember also that all of the cars are traveling in the same direction on the track, which is a factor to eliminate the possibility of head-on collisions. So I think that a person is probably safer out on the track than you are driving home from the track. I drive racing cars because I, first of all, derive a tremendous satisfaction from trying to get the most out of a car while you're on the track. To get the car around the corner as fast as you possibly can, having it right on the brink of spinning out and so on, is a thrill that's pretty hard to describe, and it's one that very few people have the opportunity of enjoying. There's also the element of competition. It gives you an opportunity to match your skills with those of a group of keen competitors, and also the recognition that comes from taking part and sometimes winning these races. Once a race is over, you don't always win. Sometimes there's a letdown, but there's always the silver lining to the cloud. There's always another race and another day, so you do have something to look forward to.